How to double your salary, uh, part 20, chapter 5, how to deal with your boss. In part 19, we have talked about the definition of boss, and some of the things like that we have to obey our boss always, and never fight with the boss. Now, we in part 20 will discuss about negotiating with the boss. Negotiations, even with the enemy, are beneficial. So, why not with boss? The famous Dale Carney's book mentions many lost promotions and rise in salaries as they were afraid to ask for it. I also felt many times asking for a raise is a little bit difficult. And in fact, in my first job, when I asked for extra increments for my post-graduation degree, uh, director one Krishnamurthy mentioned that you may be from IIT, but you may be from postgraduate, but how does it help my company? You have to prove it, then earn it, then why increments? I can get you promotion also, he said. So bosses, of course, they have their own logic and reason. And lesson is that you have to ask and probably follow up. One of the recent or later jobs which I did was I was negotiating for a transfer to a project site. So with that, what happened was from a metro city to go to a project site, my rent has almost reduced by 70%. And also I started getting project allowance. So what I want to say is that sometimes it is you have to negotiate on perks, if not on the increments. Site allowances, deer allowances, travel allowance are a few you can increase. When I was the refinery specialist in Mediterranean and erstwhile USSR, I used to visit a refinery every 2 weeks, and then that was a good perk for me. The salary was actually most of them I could save. Saving reminds me of saving of boss job. I once asked my friend, does boss protect your job or you protect his job? So he was surprised. Saving boss's job? Does it mean doing his work or getting him a better job or just help him to retain his job? I said anyone can be, it's possible. I recall one incident where one of our ex-bosses was involved in a inquiry where his own subordinate had to conduct the inquiry. Without going into details, I will say that the boss was had to ultimately resign and go, and the subordinate helped him to get a job. So boss asked if the job is good, and then his subordinate told him that yes, this is the job which he was been trying, and then he got it, but because it was a director's job, he didn't have the courage to take it up. So he suggested, why not you take it up? So what I'm telling is that it is possible that when you try for several jobs, some of the jobs which you don't want to take it up because you're already getting that kind of position or salary, then you can recommend them to your staff if at all they are looking for a change, or the same thing applies to the boss. These are all the experiences I got, and then I can't name the person, but definitely I will tell you it happened. I recall one of my first jobs. Uh, I told my boss that if he can try for a different company, and he wanted to know which one is a better company. How do we know? So I told him that he can look at the market or value or share value of that company. So accordingly, he applied for a job and he got it, and he went and he got the job. The moral of the story is help your boss to get a better job, and later you can join that company, or you can take his position. You know, this comes under the general category that you help everybody to better the salary. It will help you also. Next subject is topic is never reject doing your boss's job. I had one staff whom I gave a lot of my work. Ultimately, he got a better job. So we'll discuss that in the next chapter. But here, I'm talking about one time there was a big vacancy at the top, and my boss had to go for the next level of job, and then fortunately I had an opportunity to work on in his place. Both were young, and he was working in a higher level, and I was also working at higher level. It was real hard work, but then it really helped me to get the experience without really taking the responsibility. One more lesson we have to learn in dealing with the bosses is that never complain to the boss about your colleagues. So I'll give you two incidents. Uh, One was I would worked in a company where I had an American boss. So when I have performed some very important job and completed the task, so my boss asked me what can he give me. I didn't have anything to ask for, but then I was a vegetarian, so I asked him, can I go home and then have my vegetarian lunch? So he graciously agreed, but which was not liked by some people. So after watching me for a couple of months, they went and complained to Don. His name was Don. So how come I can be allowed to go home on a working hours? So the boss asked them, it is my lookout, not your lookout, to look at for colleagues. And then to make matter worse for them, he had given me more increments. And now they didn't complain. They came to me and then said, we have indirectly helped you. So I asked them how. They said, we went and complained to Don about you, and then he told us that you are doing very good job, and to prove his point, he had to give you better increment and better promotion. So I thanked my colleagues for complaint against me. And another incident I will also share on that. There is one uh, person by name Balsara. He was in HPCL where I worked. So I had a story about it that it seems he was one among his colleagues, first among the colleagues to be promoted. The story goes like this: that it seems he used to take extra responsibility, and then he used to follow up with his colleagues that whether they have done the job or not, and then uh, all his colleagues were a little bit annoyed with Mr. Balsara, and then they went and complained to their boss against him. So their boss asked him what was the problem. They said he is bossing over us. Uh, then, well, slowly he found out the person whom they are against, they are complaining, was really taking additional responsibility, and then he was following with them on the job, and he didn't see anything wrong. And then the next month they find Balsara was promoted as a supervisor for all these colleagues. So it looked a little bit funny, but then it is true, it happened. So what I would say is that never complain against your colleagues. Two ways it will give us a problem. One is that it cannot be viewed as a genuine complaint, and it may be viewed as your jealousy, or if it like in Balsara's case, he may be uh, what do you call us, viewed as more competent, and then he may be promoted. Okay, so well, there is no separate chapter to deal with staff or colleagues. Some things are common. While we never claim you are smarter than your boss, even if you are with colleagues, the rule is uh, not strict, and it can be uh, it can be a guidance. However, being helpful and not complaining about colleagues improve the teamwork. Uh, that doesn't stop you from displaying your talent or showing your extraordinary achievements. I started a computer club early in my career in which many participated enthusiastically, including my bosses and some of the other department heads also. That not only improved my computer skills but also established my lead in computer applications and related jobs in our industry. And that was the time when the computers were coming up, PCs were, not very, what do you call it, familiar, popular. And then and that helped me. So starting a computers club, or maybe being in active, taking an active role in local chapters of your professional bodies, these are all are helpful for your career. So let's now talk about the tips to dealing with the typical bosses. Of course, this is my experience. It may not be true for all, but I will quickly go through that. Bosses are always, all same and in adverse conditions, and always remember, boss is a step in your career ladder than a stumbling block. Uh, so the different bosses require different, ways, and let's now talk about some of the bosses whom I had. The one a supporter. I had a very dynamic boss, Don, whom I mentioned. He was very supportive, and gave me a lot of experience and exposure, and he empowered me also. Uh, he told me to follow up on the jobs I needed to coordinate with my colleagues and other department personnel. So I was not very keen for follow up with others. I said, even though I did not need follow up, he says, probably others need the follow up, he said. I learned from Don how to empower subordinates and makes them responsible for their work. There is another one, Mr. Lancaster, who was a quiz master. He used to be a nightmare to all our colleagues who had to give a weekly presentation on their projects. Though he was a civil engineer, his technical knowledge spanned all branches of engineering, and his logic used to be exceptional. If we propose any improvement in the plant, he used to ask how we have been managing all these days, and and if we don't propose them, any improvements, then he would say that we are not progressive. So Lancaster taught me how to double the profitability of the company and then work on minimum operating conditions. I learned from him the concept of zero additional capital expenditure. Uh, and most important is I learned how to calculate my contribution to the company I worked for. The projects and improvements I proposed used to be the tune of 10 times my salary. Thus, I could proudly tell my staff, unless your contribution is double, your salary cannot be double. There is one gentleman, Bob, uh, who talked about tennis while in the interview itself. The best part of the interview is that he told me how we could play tennis once I joined the Babcock refinery. Uh, that gave me an idea that he already selected me in the interview. So in the interviews, it's always better to look for the clues, which are sometimes non-verbal or sometimes off the line remarks, which would tell us how we impressed the boss. Uh, it's always better to have a personal relation with the boss, though need not be on a close, but at least you should be on a talking terms. There is one inspirer in Judges I had who taught me that um, we shouldn't be just active, but we should be productive. And there is one more taskmaster, Mr. Sharma, who was stickler to the detail and used to follow up regularly about the progress of the job. The only way you can avoid his questions was to finish the job ahead of schedule. And one of my first bosses was Rao, who was a stickler to details and taught me how to collect the data and check the data for accuracy and details closely before coming to any conclusion. And one we had a Tom Crystal, who are know all, had a knack of coming up with the presentations. Every time he says that he has not learned anything new from the presentation, so that put pressure on the people who come with new ideas and also the plans which would work. Then there is one guy called, I would call them head of the spy project racket. Some bosses depend on the information collected through the staff, and he was like that. And well, sometimes when you do follow this path, the trouble is that your information all the time may not be right. Mm? Then they will be losing the staff and their loyalty also. And we had a friend, Mark, who was a friend, like more of a friend, and I used to interact with him as to know the management viewpoint and then correct myself. One day I just jokingly asked him, do we get promotion if we complete this project well? And Mark said, forget about the promotion. If we fail in the project, then we both have to look for a new job. That's how I knew the trend of the thing. Then there is a doubter, Mr. Vora, who was my boss and told me, let only you and me handle the PCs. Of course, it is in early 80s. It shows only his lack of knowledge about computers. And I asked him, I don't know how a person can damage a PC, even if it doesn't work, he doesn't know how to work, then he probably may not go near the PC, I said. But then there's some bosses who are doubters. Then some are time wasters. Some bosses give work to keep staff busy, thinking that idle man's mind is a devil's workshop. And with the problem with this, keeping staff engaged is that when really you require a work to be completed on a war footing, still staff may not be motivated. Then there were some benevolent bosses, and some staff take advantage of them. But I would say with the benevolent bosses, you can talk about the company's progress and future, and your job potential and things like that. So in summary, bosses can be different, but our dealing with bosses has to be with sincerity and earnest attitude to climb the career ladder. The lesson to be learned is uh, different bosses need different stocks. And final tip to deal with your boss: brilliant employees will have problems with their bosses. Honest employees will have problems with subordinates. If you are both, you are in big trouble. What is the solution? You shouldn't tell your boss that you are brilliant, and let boss realize that you are brilliant. And it is not wise to brag about your integrity with your staff. So these are all the experiences which I have. And before we go to the next important chapter, that is chapter 6, the developing staff and subordinates. I would say one word about the bosses. Uh, Boss is a boss, and like a boss can never be wrong, even when he is wrong. So we should remember that. And I'll close this chapter with this note. And the part 21 will deal with the developing staff and subordinates, that is chapter 6. So this is the end of chapter 5, and signing off is author Rajsekhar Polapragada. How to double your salary. 5th chapter, dealing with bosses, is complete.